Hi, my name is Thomas Brown from Quelea Counseling Services with physical locations in Kitchener, Waterloo, Brantford, and the Ohsweken First Nations Reserve, and virtually locations everywhere. We offer our services through a variety of online digital platforms as well as over the telephone. Well, I think it goes without saying that we are in a very topsy-turvy, unprecedented, unpredictable time. These are times that I like to call ground zero moments. And ground zero moments are times in our lives when major things are happening. They might happen when somebody dies in our lives. They might happen if we, lose a job or if there's a major shift. And certainly they happen during times such as these where there's a lot of stress, where there's a lot of uncertainty, when things are changing around us and when things like this have never happened before. What happens during ground zero times for ourselves? Well, one thing I know that happens to me is that my emotions tend to kind of go all over the place. I might be kind of feeling kind of frustrated in a moment and then maybe feeling more hopeful and okay over here. And then other moments, I'm just not sure what I'm feeling. And I think what also can happen for us is that we will often launch into our kind of default coping. And if we look at it from kind of a primitive survival of the fittest or protective and defense mode, we could even think about it as our fight, flight, or freeze response. What do I mean by that? Well, are we somebody in times of crisis that tends to kind of get ramped up and launch into more of a fight mode? Do we lash out? Do we go and get irritable while we're driving, or we kind of get angry and bring a bunch of stuff into the house and kind of hoard it? Are we someone who launches into more of an avoidance or a flight mode? Do we kind of turn off the television? We don't read the newspaper. We just sort of look the other way. Or do we just kind of allow ourselves to numb out with Netflix or eating or alcohol or something else? Or it might be that we just get frozen in overwhelm, frozen in rumination. Or I think that we can also kind of get frozen in like a deer in the headlights, just staring at our screens, reading every post about the pandemic, reading about all of the cases and the deaths, reading about the lack of products that are in the grocery stores and things like that, and just get kind of frozen, stuck in that, watching it kind of unfold around us and getting overwhelmed by that. So what are we going to do in a time like this, in a ground zero moment in our lives, and how do we find ourselves coping? Well, one of the first things that I think we need to do is acknowledge and normalize that emotional piece of it, that it's okay for our emotions to be kind of topsy-turvy and unpredictable. I describe my emotions as wily. I'm never quite sure how they're going to respond, and it might come out at interesting times. I also think it's important that normalizing piece is really critical here, to acknowledge that we are all in this together and that we're all feeling that kind of sense of uncertainty, that not knowing how long this is going to last, and also really wondering, how are we going to sustain this long term? How am I going to figure out how to balance all of this stuff going on? So that's one piece, to sort of normalizing the emotion and allowing it to be. I'm trying to kind of acknowledge moment by moment my emotional responses to things. This morning I was feeling quite frustrated with my children. They're at home right now, as am I, and you may hear them in the background. And I was feeling kind of frustrated and was in that moment. But then later in the day, we were doing some worksheets and some homework, and I was kind of amazed at my daughter knowing how to write these letters, and I was feeling kind of proud of her. And I kind of was like, in that moment, kind of contrasted, oh yeah, I was frustrated, but now I'm this. And there was kind of a nice juxtaposition there that was interesting for me to acknowledge. But what about this fight, flight, or freeze? What are we going to do about that? I think the first piece there is also to raise our own awareness about what our typical responses are. For me, I am kind of have a healthy combination of avoidance and getting overwhelmed and kind of frozen. But I, in times of stress or crisis, tend to want to kind of look the other way or just kind of see white. I'm not great in a crisis. I acknowledge that and I know that about myself. And so what I need to do is sort of challenge myself to engage differently and to get on board with paying attention to what's going on around me. With the fight, flight, or freeze responses, probably none of us are going to be in one category, and we may find ourselves oscillating between all of them. But there's probably going to be a go-to that we find ourselves in most frequently. And I think that we need to really be aware of that in ourselves and then challenge ourselves and ask ourselves the question, is this working for me? Is this strategy that I've used getting me where I want to be? Am I achieving what I want? Am I finding my way through these uncertain days in a way that's useful for me. And then to challenge ourselves a little bit to try something different, a newer strategy. So, like I said, for me, I'm trying to find a healthy balance between kind of getting overwhelmed by reading every news story, between that and then not reading any at all. So finding kind of a middle ground, or if I find myself wanting to skim over an email or skim over something that kind of raises my anxiety, I challenge myself to, well, it's time to read this one and pay attention to this, even though it might raise my anxiety and make me feel uncomfortable. So, not that this is, the magic bullet or anything, but through these uncertain days and as things continue on, I really invite you to raise your awareness first to kind of your emotional responses, and with a lot of self-compassion and common humanity, acknowledge that we're all in the same boat, we're all feeling what we feel, and that it's okay. And then to also raise your awareness about your responses, about your default responses to stress, and challenge yourself to respond in a way that's flexible and useful and that gets you where you want to go. We all need to exercise a lot of self-compassion around these times and a lot of compassion towards others, because we're all in the same boat and trying to figure this all out together. Over the next while, Qualia Counseling will be putting out a lot of vlogs and blogs, tips to try to get through this all. So stay tuned to this website and we'll keep putting content up there. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.